So hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us. For many of you, I know this is not the first time you've joined us for the forum session this week. And if in the previous discussions you've found it as exciting as I have to hear about the super cool initiatives that are happening around the world, the really innovative approaches that are being applied, the lessons that we're learning, and just the sheer commitment that we're seeing from humanitarian actors to ensure that services are delivered in what are really some of the most incredibly challenging circumstances. If those are the kinds of things that you've been excited about or are going to get excited about, you're in the right place. You're going to see on your screen shortly the presenters that we have for you today. A lot of them will be familiar names, they'll be familiar faces, and that's for good reason, because they are really, I think, some of the most inspiring people in the business. We're going to learn a lot more today about what is happening around localization, what has been done, what can be done, and ways that we can really push the sector more and more to achieve that vision of as local as possible, as international as necessary, and a more localized response. There are plenty of people coming up that will be really far more knowledgeable and inspiring about this than me, so I'm not going to take up any more of your time. I'm going to pass you across to William. William, you all know, is our Global Protection Cluster Coordinator, and William's going to give us some initial opening remarks, and then we're going to proceed on to hearing about the IASC guidance. William, with that, I'm going to hand over to you.
William, do you want to turn your video camera on? Oh, there you are.
Thanks, Anthony, and thanks, Julie, and thank you all for joining us today to this very precious session for us in the Global Protection Cluster. Coordinating protection might have been in some past era an international response to some local problems. Today, to coordinate protection is clearly, in most of the cases, a local response to many internationally created problems. And 2 years ago, we started in the cluster a reconciliation process with ourselves to resemble more and more to the reality of responding to protection problems and coordinating. And we have seen a number of commitments that we have made, from financing locally driven responses to actual leadership in the clusters on the ground. I believe today's session is but a continuation of this process, and where we want to build on going forward from today is to move from anecdotal success stories to systematic structural progress in being locally led, locally driven, and truly a local cluster. So without taking much more time, I'm keen to listen to our presentations today and to learn what do we need to structurally formalize in the way we run the cluster to be able to say in time that is not so far away, in the next month, truly, that we have become in full compliance with our reality, a truly locally led cluster. So I'm very keen to hear from all of you, and over back to you, Anthony, to drive us through this session. Thank you.
Thanks, William. So we promised you lots of exciting speakers, but before we get there, we're going to put you all to work first. We'd like to hear from you to the extent to which you're aware of and familiar with this really, really important IASC guidance. You'll see in the, I believe in the chat, there'll be a link. Many of you will have used Mentimeter before. You need to pull out your phone or pull out your computer log into that link and it will ask you for a code. You can see the code there at the top of the screen starts with a 13, and then it's going to ask you some questions. Once you've answered those questions, you're going to be able to see the responses coming up on the screen there. The first question we have for you is just to what extent you're familiar with the guidance. We're really keen to find out, before we launch into telling you about the guidance, just how many of you have seen it, how many of you have read it, how many of you are fully across it, and perhaps as we expected, as we can see on the screen there, there's still a bit of a way to go for us to ensure that you're all aware that this guidance is out there. We can see that there's a pretty big red column there that suggests that the guidance is certainly not as widely disseminated as we would like. It's good news for us because that's our opportunity today to do that with you. We're going to hear from Marina, from OCHA, just on what this guidance is and why it's so important. So if you haven't read it before, please do not worry. That's gonna be your opportunity now. We're also going to, as we proceed through today, have the opportunity to challenge our presenters, to share briefly experiences we have, but also to find out from our presenters what they might propose or suggest or be able to share with us too. If you've got questions, please do note them in the chat. We have a team of super tech savvy people who are going to be able to help channel those questions back to us when it's time for a plenary. In very limited time, we've set our presenters the challenge of providing us with all of their wonderful experiences in a very short space of time, and then we have limited time for questions. So please don't wait to the end. If you've got suggestions, please do let us know. Put that in the chat, or be ready to quickly put up your hand as soon as we get to plenary. We have a second question. You'll have an opportunity there if you've logged in to tell us then what are the areas that this guidance note has recommended actions on to accelerate localization. So if you have read the guidance, please do let us know what you think the areas are where it has recommended actions. If you haven't read the guidance, maybe you want to have a guess at what the areas that the guidance might recommend are. You'll see them start to pop up on the screen. And to those who got in early and mentioned resourcing, funding, that certainly, as you all know, is a really critical area that we know we need to see action on if we're going to accelerate localization. Really wonderful to see capacity building in there as well, coming through strongly as one of the recommended areas. That's validating for all of us who've been working in this area for a long time to know that we're on the right track. And really nice to see in there somebody's noted the institutional element of capacity strengthening. I know we'll hear more about that today, but that's a really critical missing link that we know we need to make progress on if we want to see localization accelerate, ensuring that that's not just technical capacity strengthening is happening, but that the institutional, the back end support to partners is also being provided. Really great to see that coming through there as well. I'm going to give you just a little bit more time to punch in your responses there. You can, I'm not going to read out everything on the screen to you. I know you can all see it there, and I will give you the chance just to read those. Please have a look at what you're seeing starting to flow up on the screen there and just reflect on that. Whether you think that these are the same kinds of issues and priorities that you have also found or come across or would put forward. Are there new things in there that you maybe hadn't thought about that are really important for our local partners to be able to deliver? And if you're looking at the same screen that I am, you'll be seeing there's a lot of very common themes, similar themes coming through there. The institutional capacity strengthening that we mentioned, funding that we very much all know about. But the leadership aspect is also coming through in multiple responses. That's really wonderful to see that is being recognised. We'll also be hearing more about that shortly. Okay. If you still are furiously typing away there, please continue. The results will still be saved. We have another question that we wanted to ask you as well before we pass you across to Marina, and that is, what is the support that you think would be needed for your organisation, particularly? In fact, this applies to whether you are an international organisation or a national organisation. But what is the support that you would need to be able to apply the IASC guidance? Remembering that this IASC guidance is all about accelerating localization. So what support would you need to be able to make this a reality, and for you and your organization to be able to contribute to localization? Thank you to those of you who've already furiously typed away some responses there. If you also want to write your responses in Spanish or in French, please feel free. We will be able to look at all of this after the workshop, after this webinar as well, to make sure that your ideas are captured and a part of our thinking going forward. A lot of really common themes coming through there. Training, it's coming through really frequently. Translation. I think for many of us, surprising that we haven't overcome this, but also we know that it's a critical issue that we need to get past, ensuring that the guidance that we are producing at the global level is produced in languages that can be received elsewhere, and that we're able to tap into all of the rich, amazing information that exists at country level, that exists in languages other than English. Funding, of course, and not surprised to see that coming through as well. Thank you, everyone, for all of your ideas here. This is really going to be super helpful for us going forward. Really nice to also see that we are, a lot of us are coming at this from the same angle. So that's going to be helpful as we try to build that critical mass, as we work together to really try to challenge the sector to make some changes. Really nice introduction and segue as well for me to pass you over to Marina. Again, another very familiar face for many of us. Marina is going to talk to us about the IASC guidance. So some of those questions that we pose to you, she's going to tell us if we got the answers right, and also what we can take from that guidance to make sure that we are all together contributing to improved localization. And Marina, with that, I'm going to pass across to you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. So really good to have everyone online, and thank you for that really good introduction. It's really helpful, Anthony. So first of all, I think I was going to talk about the guidance, and I wasn't sure how much people knew about the guidance. So the Mentimeter is super useful. So one, thank you for your honesty. First of all, it's really useful to know how much people have had the time to absorb, and we realize there's a lot of guidance that comes out. First of all, we're quite excited about the guidance, and I know guidance is not necessarily something that necessarily brings word excitement immediately to it, but you know, we had interim guidance, we had lots of different documents issued on localization. There's been a lot of talk about how to promote localization. We know there are a lot of global processes. There is the Grand Bargain, which is also focusing on localization. The purpose of the guidance was really to make it very focused. So first, let me explain what the guidance is and what it is not. It's not a magical cure. It's not going to resolve all issues with localization. It was done in consultation with, I think, over 150 local actors. So hopefully we got the consultation part right. It wasn't just written by a bunch of people at headquarters. It was translated into 4 languages in the draft form. Thank you to the UNICEF-led clusters who actually did that. And we will be translating. So I'm already responding to some of the questions which were raised in the Mentimeter. We realized that passing guidance is one thing, rolling out is something completely different. What makes this guidance different? If you could go to the next slide, please. So first of all, it's a guidance that it was adopted in July. It has very concrete indicators which will be monitored globally and a number of optional indicators that can be added at country level. We recognize that the action on localization takes place at both levels, but it's really the country level that's critical. So it's aimed at humanitarian coordinators, humanitarian country teams, clusters, intercluster coordination groups, and other task forces and working groups. What it does not deal with directly is the issue of funding. It doesn't ignore the issue of funding, but it's really about coordination and participation and leadership. So what is an LNA according to the guidance? Next slide, please. There's a whole range of different organizations that are recognized as local and national actors, recognizing that who is a local national actors can also vary according to context. But let's just say that the first main group is local and national NGOs. The second group, it also recognizes that national and local authorities are local and national actors. Local private sector can be also an actor, and there are sometimes development-focused organizations that actually contribute to humanitarian efforts. So that's also important to keep in mind. It recommends a number of different actions on participation and representation, on leadership, on capacity strengthening, on resourcing for coordination. It recognizes that coordination doesn't come out of the blue. It's very hard to coordinate and to expect people to devote time and people and efforts if there's actually no funding for it. And it recognizes that actually local and national actors also must be actually funded and resourced to be able to be active participants in coordination. It also recognizes that visibility is a critical element. If you don't recognize the efforts of local and national actors, you will not get the funding. It will be very hard to get that funding. So hence, it's really important to have that visibility. And there's a whole set of other things, and I'm not going to now be regurgitating the guidance to you. I do encourage you to read it, to acquaint yourself to it. And I think it's quite practical. It has a number of different steps that everyone should and could and should take. It doesn't set global targets. It recognizes that country contexts are very individual, that you actually cannot necessarily compare country X to country Y. And it actually assumes the position that it is really critical for those dialogues at country level to occur on what is a good target for a certain country. How do you best adapt it? Is it practical? Is it feasible? And is it also relevant to local context? So if you wouldn't mind turning to the next slide, please. I wanted to actually take this opportunity, because I don't have a lot of time today, is to prod you a little bit as critical partners, members of the Global Protection Cluster, to ask, how is the Global Protection Cluster and the AORs, how are we collectively faring? And I say we, because I think it's a collective exercise. It's not just about one cluster doing well or one part of the system doing well. If one part is not doing well, it will automatically affect everyone else. There's a domino effect. We are really interlinked, and localization is everyone's business. So according to the 2020 mapping, so we collect data on an annual basis on IASC coordination structures. And according to the mapping, we actually can see what are the indicators and how are the different parts of the system doing on the different indicators. So I'm just going to show you a few slides. And this is not passing judgment, right? Just to be very clear. It's really showing what is the current status, and to really encourage you to think, what do you need to do to move the needle? So let's look at how the global protection cluster, well, the protection cluster as a whole is doing. So what I'm showing you here is the orange and the black. Let me explain what the orange and the black are. The orange shows national and local NGO participation. So first, we're looking at participation. How do people participate in various structures, and who are members of the different clusters and sectors, country by country? And I think what you see here is a wide range. There are certain countries, such as Myanmar, where that percentage is very small. And then there are other parts where that percentage is actually rather large. And what we can see is that if you combine, so if you look at the protection cluster itself, it's a 46% for local and national NGO participation overall. And then there is a smaller percentage of local and national authorities, which is the black. And for the if you add the protection and the AORs together, you actually see that climbs up to 51%. So over half of members in the clusters worldwide are local and national actors. And I want to tell you that's actually quite a good statistic in relation to global averages. So that's actually good. And you can see the global average is up on top. So you're actually doing slightly better, I think, as a group than the global average for clusters. But the question is that the right place for you to be? Do you want to have more than half the membership as local and national actors? And then the other, perhaps slightly more difficult question about local and national authorities, is that the right percentage? Recognizing the protection does bring certain challenges in terms of involving local authorities, particularly in politically charged contexts. Turning to leadership, because one is participation, and then there's a lot of underlying things here. Participation has to be meaningful. It's not just about ticking the box. And there are a number of actions the guidance suggests. How do you actually make that meaningful? How do you make sure that local and national actors are truly, it's a true partnership, that they are not just representing, not just having a seat, but actually have the airspace, actually are encouraged, are coached, are supported. Turning to the next slide, please. So the next step is really leadership, right? So how much leadership do you have by local and national actors? And the question is this enough, right? So I'm showing you percentages, how you compare. And here it's interesting that the statistics for protection and the AORs, well, for protection it's 14%, for protection and AORs it's 22 when combined. And compared to other clusters and the global averages, it's actually lower. Is that the right place for you to be? Should you have more leadership by local and national actors? And can you? And if you want to move that needle, what do you need to do? Moving on, we look at, if you don't mind moving the slide, we also look at other groups, so technical working groups and so on. And here we see that the actual percentages rise a little bit, but still lower than average, the global average. And that's equivalent, it sort of goes up at subnational level, which is the general trend. The lower down you go from national level, usually more national you have more local and national actors. Is that sufficient also? Do you want to go up? And then finally, looking at the issues of what we would call proxy indicators, but it's an indicator of how much you're involving people. We also look at the use of local and national languages. And again, I'm trying to squeeze a lot into a short presentation. So when you look at how does the protection cluster and associated AORs, how much do you use national languages? 3/4. Is that enough? Do you need to have more translation, for example? And again, the guidance gives a lot of suggestions on how do you increase capacity, how do you increase representation, etc. So from my side, I would just say you compare. It's even to averages, but it's not equivalent, perhaps, to where we need to be. I would suggest that we probably need to be at 100%. And then my last slide is just a question for you, and that's sort of really to push you. Consider, what what should be your own targets for localization? How are you going to be developing the capacity of local and national partners? What does this mean? Will you have twinning programs? Will you have mentoring programs? Will you have inductions? There's a whole range of things, again, the guidance suggests. And I'm not saying these indicators are a solution to everything. They just help us monitor part of the progress. And there's a lot of other suggestions. And I saw that some people actually read the guidance in detail because they also realized that there was an issue about how you get engaged in HRPs, in needs assessments, how do you get involved in different parts of the program cycle. And there's a whole host of measures that are suggested. So again, I'd like to encourage you to read the guidance. I would like you to become champions of that guidance in your country context, on whatever context you work in, because you can actually be a champion wherever you work, and to really help us move the needle and consider what challenge are you going to set to yourself. And to respond to one of the questions I saw pop up in the chat, the guidance is going to be translated, also the final one, although the near final version, which is already exists in local languages, but the final version will be translated into 4 languages. So that includes French, Spanish, and Arabic. So that's it from me. Sorry, Anthony, I hope I haven't gone on for too long. I'll turn back to you and happy to answer any questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Marina. And I'm quite sure that's going to stimulate a lot of questions. We have a very brief moment if people have clarifying questions. So if you want to raise questions about what next, or you want to talk about some of your experience, I'm going to ask you just to hold that thought because we want to also hear from Sebastian and from Yusuf, who are going to talk to us about their experience at the country level. But if you have any clarifying questions on what Marina has just shared, so what does something mean? What is that? How do we interpret that data? Please drop it into the chat or stick your hand up now. And if I move you on too fast, you can still use the chat and we will circle back to it when we get to the plenary session. So just to check if there is any clarifying questions. I think it looks like people are still taking that in, Marina. So I will take that as a sign that we can move on to the next presentation. But as I said, please do drop your questions into the chat because we will take the time to reflect on some of those and get you some answers. So pack your bags. We are heading to Colombia. I'm going to introduce you to Sebastian, who is with the Protection Cluster in Colombia. Sebastian has worn many hats actually in Colombia over the years, knows the whole country, has worked across the many corners of the country and across the many different aspects of protection that are relevant there. So we're really happy and really privileged to have Sebastian's time today to share with us your experience, particularly around capacity strengthening and the experience there from the cluster perspective in Colombia. With that, Sebastian, I hand over to you.
Anthony, colegas, mil gracias. Primero, permítanos desde Colombia hacer un agradecimiento especial por la invitación a participar con nuestra experiencia de localización y de trabajo del clúster de protección y las áreas de responsabilidad activas en Colombia, un esfuerzo de varios años. Entonces, mil gracias por eso, un saludo cordial a todos quienes nos acompañan el día de hoy. Dado el corto tiempo, solamente me voy a encargar de compartir con ustedes 3 ideas que creemos complementan justamente y contribuyen a esta discusión. Desde la experiencia de Colombia, un elemento fundamental ha sido la aplicación del marco normativo nacional, la existencia de un marco normativo en política pública de atención integral a las víctimas, de atención al desplazamiento forzado, ha sido parte nodal de todo nuestro trabajo, ha sido central. El segundo elemento, la articulación con actores nacionales y locales en esa lógica de engranaje en el territorio resulta clave. Y cómo en un tercer momento nuestra disposición de trabajo articulado nacional, territorial, hace que el clúster de protección, las áreas de responsabilidad en Colombia tengan un porcentaje muy alto de funcionarios nacionales que generan una respuesta local importante. Next, por favor. En términos de la política pública, quisiéramos agregar este elemento. Siguiente diapositiva, por favor. Colombia ha tenido y tiene un conflicto de varios años. Yo creo que por lo mismo es tan importante esta participación, porque puede que a nivel global haya esa lógica de una crisis prolongada, pero creemos que es importante relevar que la persistencia de la crisis en Colombia y de la multiplicidad de las crisis que hoy tenemos, conflicto, desastres naturales, COVID-19, la llegada de población refugiada e inmigrante, nos obligan como estructura de protección a adaptarnos y nos obligan como estructura de protección a influir en el marco normativo. De allí quisiera resaltar lo que ha tenido que ver con la Ley 387, que tuvo en cuenta los principios rectores del desplazamiento, cómo en Colombia se han incluido los elementos asociados a la lógica étnica de los pueblos indígenas y afrocolombianos, pero también cómo recientemente, en enero, se ha prorrogado la ley de víctimas por 10 años. Nos parece un elemento importante. Cómo en la ley de víctimas se han incorporado los acuerdos de paz también resulta clave para nosotros por un elemento fundamental. Nosotros, como parte del clúster de protección, como esa estructura que hace ese relacionamiento con el territorio, somos claves en la coordinación nación-territorio, tanto interna como de las entidades territoriales. Un reto que nos queda. Colombia firma acuerdos de paz, elimina conflictos, pero le quedan otros. Y en ese sentido es fundamental seguir trabajando en temas de marcos de política pública. Siguiente diapositiva. Next, please. El elemento asociado, como mencionaba William y demás, actores nacionales y actores locales en los territorios. Para nosotros es fundamental el trabajo con las oficinas de derechos humanos locales, departamentales, regionales. Experiencias como las personerías o ombudsman local, la lógica de la defensa de derechos humanos en lo local, resultan clave para nosotros. No son parte estructural de nuestro organigrama de clúster de protección, pero resultan fundamentales en la consulta. Son entidades que existen en Colombia en todos los municipios de este país y para nosotros va a resultar clave siempre la consulta con ellos por el análisis de protección, pero también porque hay una lógica de confianza. Next, please, in the presentation. La consulta con ellos, la posibilidad de hacer ese monitoreo conjunto, ahí lo señalamos. Personerías, la lógica misma de la generación de confianza resulta clave para nuestro trabajo. El trabajo con la Defensoría del Pueblo del nivel nacional, con las autoridades indígenas y afro, ya lo señalaba. No son parte de la estructura, pero para nosotros es fundamental la consulta a las comunidades, las consultas a las autoridades locales para poder establecer estrategias de intervención coherentes a los riesgos que existen en los territorios. Entonces eso nos permite mucho trabajo coordinado. Un elemento solamente para ilustrarlo, el confinamiento. Colombia hoy, además de tener situaciones recurrentes de desplazamiento forzado interno, tiene el confinamiento como una problemática absolutamente compleja. Y en esa idea, en esa lógica, las autoridades étnicas tienen la posibilidad de incidir de manera efectiva. Y nosotros, como decía William en estos días, no ser su voz, sino escucharles y favorecer que la voz de las autoridades étnicas tradicionales se sienta en los escenarios de protección del Estado colombiano. Es importante para nosotros la participación de las víctimas, es fundamental en todos, tanto en los procesos de política pública como en todos nuestros diseños. Las juntas de acción comunal, todos los procesos organizativos de las comunidades resultan para nosotros clave. El reto gigante, el cierre entre la norma que se ha diseñado, que es completa en Colombia, es importante, pero también la práctica, ese cierre de brechas, el clúster de protección es un elemento fundamental. Siguiente, please. La siguiente diapositiva. El último elemento, solamente compartir con ustedes, el clúster de protección en Colombia tiene 4 equipos subnacionales. Esos equipos subnacionales están ubicados en los territorios de mayor recurrencia de emergencia, donde tenemos más problemáticas asociadas a desplazamientos forzados masivos e individuales, confinamientos, situaciones también de desastres de origen natural. Todos esos elementos nos plantean a nosotros la necesidad que como estructura nacional fortalezcamos esa presencia territorial. Lo decimos con mucho respeto y con mucho orgullo. En Colombia el clúster de protección tiene presencia territorial y eso nos pone en una situación de análisis de vacíos, de protección, de riesgos de una forma muy distinta. Y tenemos 3 áreas de responsabilidad activa: violencias basadas en género, acción contra minas y protección de la niñez. En casos como protección de la niñez, tenemos colegas de ONGs nacionales haciendo el coliderazgo nacional de estos espacios, pero pues también somos un equipo en términos de cómo nos adaptamos a los contextos y a los desafíos que nos plantea un escenario como el de hoy de Colombia, que tiene unas complejidades muy altas, que tiene una superposición de emergencias muy compleja y que requiere de nosotros tener claridad sobre lo que es el enfoque de área, lo que es la protección por presencia como base operativa de nuestro trabajo. Ya lo mencionaba Anthony, un elemento recurrente: la limitación de recursos financieros para poder estar allí donde nos necesita la gente. Y en ese sentido es un elemento de desafío enorme que esperamos ir pues también supliendo con la visibilidad de la situación Colombia como estrategia del clúster de protección. Mil gracias a todos ustedes.
Sebastian, thank you so much. That was a huge amount that we asked you to get through in such a short space of time. So thank you for so succinctly sharing with us that experience. At the risk of making us dizzy, I'm going to now take us directly across to Nigeria. I was so excited when I saw Abu Yusuf's name on our program because I know from personal experience that he has been one of the most vocal and active advocates of localization in Nigeria. Abu Yusuf, I'm not going to take up any more of my time because I think everybody here needs to hear from you. For those of you who are thinking you need a break to get a glass of water or something, hang in there because after Abu Yusuf's presentation, we are going to take a 2-minute break before we launch into our discussion and Q&A session. Abu Yusuf, over to you.
Yes. Hello everyone. Yeah, thank you very much, Anthony, for the introduction. I'm just here to give my experience with regard to resourcing for localization, focusing on Northeast Nigeria. Next slide, please. So basically, this slide cover four basic outlines, which you can see presented in the screen. So I will just move directly to the first aspect, which is talking about the child protection coordination arrangement, Northeast Nigeria. Next slide, please. So let's look at the CPSS coordination arrangement. First and foremost, the CPSS coordination arrangement was introduced in 2017 with more membership, with NNGO participants as more, which cover more of their membership. And then the CPSS is led by the Government Ministry of Women Affairs and Shared Development alongside UNICEF. So in 2019, there is this arrangement for local NGO coordination where Growstrong Foundation was selected to become the co-lead through a competitive process. And thereafter, a national coordinator was recruited to serve alongside with the international coordinator to lead the CPSS, and which GSF is hosting the co-coordinator up to now. Next slide, please. So now let's look at the progress we made in terms of resourcing for coordination. First and foremost, as you can see very clearly that the child protection area of responsibility with support from Street Child, as well as Street Child funded the group for more than 18 months from 2019 to 2020. And currently, UNICEF is stand to fund the cost for the next 18 months after the funding from Street Child and CPAOR concluded. And then some of the main funding we use in the funding include salaries and related expenses such as transportation, communication, and logistic support. Next slide, please. So, however, though apart from this progress that we make, there are a series of challenges which I try as much as to summarize it into 4 headings. One is the uncertainty of the funding, because we don't even know where the next funding now will come. We find it very hard to see who should fund and who will not give us. And just a simple example with the recent funding from CPOR exceeded, UNICEF have to step in, where we reach out to many NGOs, many partners that could not able to fund that. And then the issue of sustainability. Yeah, the position currently is really tied to a project funding. And now when the project ends, the national coordination arrangement might end, which there are no clear pattern for sustainability in that regard. And then resources for coordination, I think was not initially as part of included in the resource mobilization strategy for GSF. So this is basically due to the fact that most of our mobilization strategy focusing on program activities rather than the leadership. And then lastly, the nature of the work of the national coordination really required a high salary level, which it is more of our normal salary scales, and it brings a kind of a dismay among a series of positions. Next slide, please. So now, finally, I will just look at the opportunities, some of the opportunities that are existing currently. As we are discussing since from the beginning, the IAS guidance is a clear opportunity for us to use it as an advocacy tools, for us to see that, yeah, resources are provided. Then the Grant Bargain 2.1, which is 2.0, sorry, which is one of the area that we should focus to see that, yeah, national NGO get a direct and flexible funding, especially for leadership support. And then one of the lesson learned, thirdly, I should look at the lesson learned now we learn with regard to us trying to see that we include resource mobilization strategy in the overall GSF mobilization strategy for the coming year. And then lastly, as most of you are very well in the clear picture, there's increasing being seen as the right the co-leadership arrangement for by local NGOs is seen as the right thing to do, as well as a good practice in the IAS coordination mechanism. And it has proved since this morning, this is what we have been talking about. So I thank you very much for your attention, and I'm on standby to answer any questions arises. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Abu Yusuf. We are going to come back to you with questions as well, so be ready. Before we do that, though, we are going to give you 2 minutes to gather your thoughts, to go grab a drink or take a brief break. It's only 2 minutes, so if you're thinking you've got time to go and walk the dog, you don't. But we are going to play some music, so you also, if you are stepping away from your computer, leave your volume on, because you'll get a sign that we're all coming back. Please do use this time to think of some questions, put them in the chat. We'll be ready to hit the raise your hand button, and we will see you back here in 2 minutes, where we will start throwing some questions and challenges out to our presenters. See you all in 2 minutes.
the crash.
Hiram, that was your sign that you should be back at your chair. And if you're not, I hope you're running back to your chair now. It's Q&A time. So now it's time to give you a chance to turn the tables on our presenters and ask them some of the challenging questions that you might have for how we can take localization to the next level. We have some turn up in the chat. I'm going to start there, but I also know we have some people in the audience who also want to ask a question. Before we get there, I'm just going to ask Rachel.
Non, moi j'ai une question. Oui, c'est Isidore.
In that case, Isidore, you've jumped to the front of the queue. Please go ahead.
Bon. Merci beaucoup pour la session de ce jour. Vraiment, elle est très, très, très intéressante parce que la question de la localisation, moi, je suis au Congo, en République démocratique du Congo, précisément à Goma, mais présentement, je suis à Ituri pour le moment. Ce que j'ai réalisé est que la question de la localisation est restée comme juste un principe, mais n'est pas vraiment jusque-là une réalité. Parce qu'on continue à comprendre que les collègues, surtout internationaux, au niveau de leur siège, cela est adopté, mais une fois sur terrain, on ne sent pas ça vraiment. Et ils n'en veulent même pas qu'on en parle parce que ils voudraient bien même réaliser des fois certaines activités que les organisations nationales devraient réaliser. Et que des fois aussi ne se constituent pas comme des organisations qui accompagnent les structures locales, mais qui voudraient faire même ce que les structures locales peuvent faire. Alors, comment peut-on se comporter face à une réalité comme celle-là? Parce que au niveau des sièges, c'est accepté, mais au niveau périphérique, cela n'est pas accepté. Voilà un peu ma préoccupation.
Isidore, thank you for your question. I'm going to throw that first of all to Sebastian. Sebastian, do you want to reflect on that question of how do we ensure that local actors are given the space to implement the activities that they should be implementing?
Sí, evidentemente todos los contextos son distintos. Pero creemos que hay elementos de experiencia que pueden ser útiles. En medio de estas múltiples emergencias, las comunidades, las organizaciones refieren y necesitan confianza. Nuestro rol en función de generar ese tipo de confianzas puede ser útil. Nosotros tenemos varias experiencias aprendidas en relación, por ejemplo, con lo que significa la infraestructura comunitaria. Llegar a construir el aula escolar, el centro de salud, no como el fin de nuestra intervención, sino como el medio que nos va a permitir justamente trabajar con las comunidades y que la voz de las comunidades se sienta. Ahí hay un trabajo fundamental y probablemente es la ironía de nuestro trabajo. Estamos allí para ser absolutamente prescindibles, que la comunidad sepa cuáles son sus derechos, que la comunidad sepa cuál es su relación con el actor institucional, con el actor que tiene la responsabilidad de la garantía de derechos. Esa es una apuesta que tenemos que plantear. Es costosa, es de largo aliento, pero creemos y nos ha dado buenos resultados. En algunos espacios, evidentemente en otros no, con expectativas que han sido fallidas, que son complejas también de resolver, pero hay elementos que pueden ser útiles. Confianza es una garantía para el trabajo y la experiencia de las organizaciones locales. Yo lo señalaba en mi presentación. Cuando hablamos de organizaciones locales, es los que han estado en el antes, los que están hoy y los que van a estar mañana. Esa posibilidad de tejer ese relacionamiento es también absolutamente clave en lo que para nosotros es las redes locales de protección. Plantear eso como una oportunidad y una posibilidad, sabiendo evidentemente, como lo menciona el colega, que son contextos distintos, que la respuesta institucional es distinta o estatal es diferente, pero esa apuesta por la confianza y por escucharles y tramitar esas necesidades en relación con la resolución de problemas.
Thanks, Sebastian. Abu Yusuf, I'm going to come to you. You may want to reflect on that question as well, but I'd also like you to reflect on Rachel's question around how do we also deal with funding going to national NGOs that are either politically funded or politically affiliated, or also managing those broader questions around perceptions of conflict of interest.
Yeah, thank you very much, Anthony. Well, I will just try to, for the first question, I will just try to focus like, okay, it's about working as local as possible, as well as international where necessary. I think this motto really means a lot if we really understand what it means directly. So for us to get the trust of either the direct donor or NGO to ensure that our ideas or our activities are accepted, we have to ensure that these activities are very friendly to the international, based on the international level, so as to conceptualize it. Then coming back to the question is like, how do we control the issue of politically motivated NGO, local NGO? Yeah, I think this is something that the international NGO have to try, or the international donors or the partners have to ensure that such by developing a very good policy to checkmate such kind of local or national NGO through a very transparent as well as a participatory process. For this, you can able to checkmate where this NGO or this local NGO are politically motivated or not. And also another point I would like to answer with regard to this question is maybe involving the local staffs on that NGO to really kind of check these NGOs or the local NGOs to ensure that there are such mistakes or the gaps are covered. Over to you.
Thanks, Abu Yusuf. I'm going to ask pass to Susan. Susan, you've got your hand up, and then I'm also going to ask Florence for her question. We'll take 2 questions this time, and then we'll go back to the chat and pull some questions from there. So Susan, over to you.
Hello to everyone. This is Susan from Iraq Women Empowerment Organization. Thank you. I'm really glad to take part of this interesting webinar. As for localization, and I can see this is really a new approach and it needs a process to be implemented. One of the big challenges that we are facing till now, it's not only the involvement or the participation of local organization, but also the local community, like the camp managers, women leaders inside camps, provisional councils, because we want to understand the reality, the facts, and the special needs in each area. We have IDPs, we have refugees, we have women-headed household, we have handicapped. So we need to understand the different needs in different areas. So this is very important. So this is to reach the localization that all the needs has been represented, has been translated, and to be able to respond. So I think we need a capacity building for all, for local NGOs, for the community, and also for the international organization and UN agencies. Sometimes there will be ignorance for the local organization. There will be a direct work from the international organization or UN agency direct with the government. So this is the ignorance of the role of civil society. So we need the international organization to give more space to local organization to be there for consultation, for the implementation, for monitoring. It is not enough. This is what we learned. This is lesson learned from all the process, that the local NGOs should be in each stage for like development, consultation, implementation, monitoring. And also I think it's very important to have emergency plan that each organization or international, UN or local, we have to have emergency. This is also the lesson learned from the pandemic of COVID-19. till we will design some plan, so it will be too late to respond. So how to have a plan, emergency plan, to be able to respond, and also to have a fund, emergency fund, that they will be able to respond immediately to different target group that we have for any crisis. So this is just, I want to highlight this here, because this is the experience that we got from like daily work. Thank you.
Susan, thank you. Really important reflections. Florence, do you want to come in with your question?
Oui, bonjour. Moi c'est Florence Massika, je viens de la RDC de Goma et je voudrais juste compléter l'idée de M. Isidore par rapport à la localisation et comme quoi les fonds vont vers les organisations internationales. Nous avons remarqué que la localisation, c'est quelque chose d'un peu utopique ou théorique qui est bien connu, structuré au niveau des documents, au niveau des global, mais au niveau du terrain, ce n'est pas appliqué. Et ce que nous, à mon avis, c'est ce qui bloque les faits d'estimer, ce qui bloque l'effectivité, c'est le fait de sous-estimer les capacités, les compétences des organisations locales. Et quand ça va être maintenant une organisation dirigée par les femmes, par exemple, notre organisation, la dynamique des femmes juristes, c'est une organisation à leadership féminin. Quand c'est une organisation à leadership féminin, il y a tendance d'avoir des doutes ou de sous-estimer les compétences. Ce qui fait à ce que les fonds, les fonds alloués pour les actions humanitaires ne parviennent pas au niveau des organisations locales. Et moi, ce que je pourrais proposer, c'est que ces organisations estimées incompétentes, ils font la même chose ou plus même par rapport aux organisations internationales qui ont une grande partie des fonds qui sont alloués dans une situation donnée, une situation humanitaire dans nos communautés. Ce que je pourrais proposer, c'est de pouvoir renforcer leurs capacités, étant donné qu'il y a aussi des critères d'accéder aux fonds qui sont des critères trop lourds qui, en amont, sélectionnent ceux qui vont accéder aux fonds. Et je vais proposer à ce que les organisations locales puissent avoir la chance d'être appuyées, d'être renforcées en capacité, afin que tous, les organisations nationales comme les organisations internationales, aient les mêmes capacités ou compétences telles que voulues par les organisations donateurs des fonds. Mais aussi, quand même nos organisations locales sont jugées d'incompétentes, mais au finish, vous allez remarquer que ce sont les mêmes staffs qui ont servi dans les organisations nationales, sont les mêmes qui vont servir dans les organisations internationales. Et on se demande où se situe la question d'incompétence. Voilà ce que je voulais partager aussi.
Florence,
Merci.
thank you so much. You've touched on a lot of the really important issues there around capacity and the roles of local partners and the roles of international partners in the response. I'm going to give both Sebastian and Yusuf a chance to reflect on both Susan and Florence's interventions. And also just to add that in the chat, there is kind of a running theme around the idea of partnerships between international and national NGOs. And how can we ensure that those partnerships are based on principled, fair and transparent and equal platforms. So maybe Abba and Sebastian, if you could also, starting with you, Abba Yusuf, reflect on both those interventions, but also what can we do as a coordination system to try to strengthen the types and models and quality of the partnerships between our national and international members of the cluster. Abba Yusuf, starting with you.
Yeah. Well, for this question, I think basically what I was able to contribute is to say that, yeah, partnership is it is a both-way process. I believe that is the case, and it works for us as a local NGO where we are currently partnering with both UN as well as international NGO after trying to displace that, yeah, we have that very capacity to be listened to and to be also adhere to our policy as well as the strategies that we have because this is a clear roadmap we give, and then the UN as well as NGO accept it. So for us, the cluster, what we should be doing is to ensure that we strengthen the systems of those local NGOs, looking at the governance, their governance structures as NGOs, how do they influence other partners as well as among their peers, and then to ensure that there is an equal representative that is in partnership. It's not one-sided anymore. Even though where there are no ground for negotiation, but yet local local partners have to stand up to the task. Then the issue of funding, based on experience and based on what we see on ground, I believe funding is from my experience, so funding is the least that you require for you to strengthen a system, as far as you are in a better place and committed to do that. So funding should only be given, especially to the national or local partners, when we ensure that their system of management is well established, as well as the institutional capacity has at least improved, so as to be held accountable, as well as be practical in whatever response. So these 5 heading, the cluster should be concentrating in supporting the local organizations. One. So for the reflection with regard to the comment make, I think I will fully agree with you that most of the staffs or most of the partners that were really the international organization or UN are recruiting are coming from the locals. But let us be mindful that these local staffs, they were recruited because they find out they are the best of the staffs that can adhere to those international standards as policy. That is why they are being recruited. What about the local NGO system? We have such system to manage those staffs based on our context, based on what we can able to provide. These are kind of things that we should be asking as local partners to us to improve that. More space will be given to us to participation. I don't know, Sylvester, over to you if you have something to add. Thank you.
Sebastian, over to you.
Bueno, tal vez dentro de la experiencia y asociado a esas preguntas, creo que hay problemas distintos en la lógica misma de la localización. No podríamos ver como limitación la implementación de fondos, la rendición de cuentas o todo lo generado justamente a ese esquema más financiero. Es probable que las organizaciones locales tengan la experticia justamente para resolver el vacío de protección y que esa sea una debilidad. Creo que tal como lo hemos hecho en Colombia, la constitución de trabajo asociado o bajo sombrillas en función de ONGs con alta experiencia en ese tema financiero y contable, pero no necesariamente en la resolución del vacío de protección. Ese trabajo en alianza es fundamental para resolver los distintos asuntos, ¿no? El problema de la comunidad, del vacío de protección, puede estar resuelto justamente por autoridades, en este caso, para nuestro ejemplo, permítanos consejos comunitarios afro o autoridades indígenas que nos pueden resolver el problema. Su limitación puede ser el tema de cómo administrar fondos de cooperación internacional, pero en eso el trabajo asociativo nos puede ayudar a resolver ese problema, que no es necesariamente el problema de la comunidad. Ese como por esa vía para contribuir desde la experiencia. Creo también en función de las otras problemáticas que se nos plantean preguntas, la lógica misma de la reacción en emergencia. Creo que para la localización es fundamental pensarnos la gestión del riesgo. Cuando trabajamos en reacción de emergencia es mucho más complejo probablemente. Si nosotros podemos dar un paso adelante utilizando el pretexto de la localización para favorecer también gestión de riesgo, creo que también puede ser un elemento útil para ayudarnos a resolver los distintos problemas que se identifican, ¿no? No necesariamente localización no resuelve todo, pero sí esa posibilidad de adaptación al contexto.
Thanks so much, Sebastian. I think we have time for maybe 2 more questions. So I'm going to pass to Monica. And then I think, Gloria, if you're online, I'm going to come to you for the final question. Monica, over to you. And Monica, I think you might still be on mute.
Buenos días a todos y a todas. Mónica Hoyos, directora de programas de la Corporación Infancia y Desarrollo de Colombia. Bueno, para nosotros ha sido muy importante ese buen ejercicio que se ha hecho desde el clúster de protección, porque como organización local se nos ha permitido participar en esos espacios, construir, hacer aportes, pero también recibir lineamientos. Sin embargo, mi pregunta va más dirigida porque es la dificultad en términos de acceder a los recursos directos con el donante. En este momento nosotros no tenemos esa posibilidad, lo hacemos a través de la cooperación internacional o efectivamente de Naciones Unidas, pero a eso se le aúna otra dificultad, y es que algunas de las organizaciones de cooperación internacional implementan los proyectos directamente. Entonces, retomo diciendo que hemos avanzado en Colombia. Tenemos que decir que acá el clúster de protección hace una labor maravillosa, pero aún nos falta en estos dos aspectos que hago referencia en este momento. Gracias.
Thank you, Monica. And Gloria, are you online? Gloria Soma, over to you.
Thank you, Anthony. A good morning, afternoon, and evening to everyone. First of all, I want to take this opportunity to raise issues around the localization agenda and the important roles and advantages of women's rights organizations and the challenges that they also do face within the humanitarian architecture, especially in the South Sudan context. The advantages of women's rights organizations, as we all know, is that they're near to the population that they serve, the knowledge context, they're more knowledgeable in their context, and also the issue around the cost benefit should greatly be acknowledged. But then we've seen great challenges actually that these organizations face in terms of, their efforts are never really so recognized. And when it comes down to the humanitarian architecture, they're actually, the least looked upon institutions within that hierarchy, though we have, the commitments from the Grand Bargain on ensuring that some of these commitments would have been achieved by the year 2020. When it comes down to issues around the coordination mechanisms, whether it's the HC or the HCT or the cluster systems, we still find that, it's a tug of war for local partners to be able to, engage or take responsibility, especially on the coordination leadership roles of being either a co-coordinator or even a coordinator. And in most cases, this is all, this has become a painfully slow process, especially in our context. And we are yet to fully, realize these steps in the near future, hopefully. And we also realize the lack of resources and funding to women's rights organizations in our context, mainly because the activities are never prioritized. They deal a lot around protection. We're talking about gender-based violence mainly, and child protection activities, the access to justice and women empowerment programs, which never are really a priority because we are so engulfed in emergency responses within the system. So that alone then blocks their opportunity to bring about that uniqueness in terms of interventions. And we've also, in several occasions, seen a deliberate exclusion of especially women's rights organizations, because they are all, compounded into what they will talk of local actors. But, within the local actors, we also, having that division and there's that uniqueness that each partner brings to the table. So a way forward that I would suggest is that for us to collectively reach the objectives of driving change and fostering accountability within the humanitarian sphere, would encourage the donors and humanitarian agencies to take the following actions. One is around the capacity strengthening or sharing, which could mainly be encouraged through, equal partnerships within that setup through INGOs or multilaterals and with the local actors themselves. We also encouraging
for, adequate, direct, flexible funding that is also long-term to be able to facilitate the efforts of women rights organizations to ensure that, they can also be able to adequately respond to crises. And we're saying that this should be channeled through, platforms that are accessible to the women rights organizations at their own country level spaces. We're talking about the country-based food funds. We're talking about start network hubs in the different localities. And currently in our context, we have a new addition of a platform called the Local Response Fund that, are easily and quickly accessible by women rights organizations within the South Sudan context. And finally, we are saying that there's got to be a deliberate move by all, humanitarian architecture leadership structures at both global and national.
Gloria, I think we might have lost you right at the end there. What I'm going to do is because we have we've expended our time for this session. We've set you the impossible task, as always, of a Q&A session with not enough time. Abu Yusuf and Sebastian, I'm going to ask you to multitask because I know that as coordinators, you're very good at doing that. And as we go through the next couple of speakers, if you could jot down some of your thoughts, particularly on how we could deal with that funding issue. Gloria, you also gave us some wonderful solutions in your intervention there, as well around how we could support women-led organizations. If you could jot some of those down, including the bit that we missed at the end, we'll make sure it's captured in the chat. I know that our following speakers also are going to be sticking to time, so we're not going to run over. But Sebastian and then Abu Yusuf, just in one final statement that you would like to make, message you'd like to leave with everybody, if you just want to make one very brief last statement, Sebastian.
Bueno, muy complejo, la discusión tan amplia. Simple y sencillamente creo que ahí hay una oportunidad en utilizar localización, en priorizar territorios más afectados dentro de los afectados para que la respuesta se base en esas comunidades que más nos necesitan. Ahí relevar el rol que pueden jugar justamente en la identificación de necesidades. Todos los ciclos de programación humanitaria serán claves. Esa coordinación desde el territorio, desde la comunidad con nosotros. No plantear unas lógicas jerárquicas, pues, en función de que nos debemos a la gente, y en ese sentido allí vamos a encontrar la respuesta. Ojalá esa articulación de todos nuestros programas humanitarios en función de necesidad, en función de respuesta y en función de incidencia respondan justamente a esa necesidad. Creo que es el reto que tenemos como líderes de clúster en cada una de nuestras operaciones, y cerraría con eso como una idea en función de un reto enorme que tenemos, justamente acercar las coordinaciones lo más que podamos a las comunidades que más nos necesitan.
And Abu Yusuf, thank you, Sebastian. Abu Yusuf, what is the last thing that you want us to walk away with? What's your message to us?
I think my message would be in just one sentence, the easiest. Let's strengthen our system. Donors will knock on our door. That's an assurance that I can give you. If you have a very good institutional system, or institutional system is strengthened and capacity in place, direct donor will be knocking on our door. That's my own last conclusion. Over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you to both of you, Sebastian and Abu Yusuf. Please do continue to jot down any other ideas and thoughts you've got there in the chat. Anyone else who's online, feel free to also contribute your ideas in response to questions there in the chat as well. But we don't want to just talk about the challenges. We also want some solutions, which is why we've lined up for you our coordinators from the GPC. I'm going to start by asking Ron from the Child Protection Area of Responsibility to share with us some of the commitments and comments from the Child Protection Area. So Ron, over to you.
Good, thank you, Anthony, and great thanks to the speakers before me. It was very good to hear those local initiatives and the work that you've been doing. So for the Global Child Protection AOR, we have partnered over the last 2 years with Save the Children and Street Child UK to pilot a localization initiative in a couple of countries, in Afghanistan, in Bangladesh, where we focused on the Rohingya refugee response, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, in Iraq, in Nigeria, as you heard from Yusuf, and in South Sudan. And the focus was really on 5 areas. It was on increasing local, national, and national actors' participation in governance, leadership and decision-making processes, increasing participation of local and national actors in the coordination groups, in meetings, activities, and events, and in promoting equal and principled partnerships, increasing local and national actors' access to flexible and quality funding, and strengthening institutional capacities of local and national actors. There have been several lessons learned. We found out, for example, there's the 2 sort of key lessons. One is, and Yusuf touched upon that as well, the significant challenge of sustaining this progress because of the lack of dedicated funding and other resources for coordination and co-coordination at national and subnational levels. And we also found, as was mentioned by some of the participants in the Mentimeter, that there's been a lot of investment in technical capacity, but the same level of investment in institutional capacity has not been made. And this made it difficult also for the local and national actors to fulfill their due diligence requirements to access funding, in particular, access to direct funding. Now, the good news I would like to bring is that the CPAOR is making the following commitments. On capacity strengthening, we will invest in strengthening the institutional capacity of local and national organizations using the ICS framework that was developed with the Global Education Cluster. As part of our work plan for the next 3 years, for 2022-2024, we will work with a select number of local and national organizations within country coordination groups and support them to strengthen their institutional capacity through training, mentoring, and coaching. And this will be done through an engagement of an organizational development specialist in 2022 to be able to provide tailored support to local and national organizations. And the outcomes of all that work will be documented. So we can use that to scale up institutional capacity strengthening in 23 and 24. On sustainable approaches, we recognize that contextualization contributes strongly to sustainability. So to this end, the global CPAOR believes that regional approaches in strengthening capacities and networks will go a long way in accelerating localization efforts. So we will build on our existing achievements and lessons of our language-specific help desks to strengthen localization approaches and initiatives in various regions. And this will also include specialized support for strengthening institutional capacity of local and national organizations. Our strong collaboration with the Global Education Cluster will also continue, and we will work together to mobilize resources that will allow for the systematic operationalization of the framework on strengthening the institutional capacity of local and national actors that we developed with the Education Cluster. And then finally, on resourcing for coordination, we will work with the Global Protection Cluster and other areas of responsibility in continuation to advocate for and with donors for dedicated resources for coordination. This will include using the IASC guidance that you heard Marina talk about to advocate at both global and country level for the allocation of country-based pooled funding to support local and national actors who have taken the co-lead and co-coordination functions at both national and at subnational level. So we look forward to continuing our work with the Global Protection Cluster and also with the other AORs to accelerate localization that is really close to our heart and really a commitment that we're making in protection coordination using the IASC guidance. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ron. I'm going to pass you directly across to William, who I believe in 3 minutes or less is going to tell us all about the additional commitments that the GPC is going to make on this issue as well. So William, over to you.
3 minutes or less.
Right.
Very good. I think the good news is localization will work. Localization will happen, is happening, will happen. Will the cluster work? I think the perspective where we come from, as explained clearly by all the participants, and my thanks to Marina, Seb, Yusuf, Isidore, Suzanne, Florence, Monica, and Gloria for for making that point clearly that the question is not can we localize the clusters in a way, it's more localization of aid is happening, can the cluster catch up kind of thing. And I believe the year ahead of us is crucial. There will be a review of some way of the cluster and an adaptation of it as it exists. And it's important to make these progresses rapidly and prove that it is a system that can survive the context change that we're going through. We will continue working on adapting protection coordination. I would like to speak about 4 key areas where we see progress and commitments. And it's great to have the recordings of these sessions in the forum. So next year, when we have the localization session, we can measure progress against the pledges we're making today. So first, in terms of participation, representation, and leadership, we have set targets for every operation. And it's great to see the accumulation of where we stand by Marina at the beginning. And we will standardize the processes of local membership. But very concretely, at the closing of this forum on the 1st of December, 10 of our operations will make very concrete pledges on how they will improve on localization for next year. And that will be a modality where from year to year, all our operations will announce where they want to progress, and we will measure against them for next year. But also in terms of participation, there is a participation the other way around. It's not about local actors participating in the clusters, but also how can the cluster system tag on human rights commissions in countries, disability inclusion networks, countering trafficking in operations, and working on laws and policies with parliamentarians. So we have to also improve in us participating in locally led processes and contributing to that and benefiting from it, so to speak. The second area of capacity building, and that was touched upon. We are very proud of our collaboration with NIR and Oxfam, who both have deployed people to our operations cell to strengthen the work on localization and advocacy, bringing the voice of local communities and actors to the global fora as it should be. There we really want to progress. We have solid partnerships, and we want to use that to tackle one important obstacle that we see in localization, which is access negotiation. Much of the access negotiation that happens in countries is UN-led, is internationally led, and it's very focused on trucks entering villages and items delivered. We would like to work with partners, and we see great potential with the new OCHA leadership to transform access negotiation concept to become meaning continuation of services on the ground, and that is in most of the cases done by local actors. Third area is this resourcing. I think our 25% copy-pasted target is getting closer to a reality in the upcoming HRPs. We have started the practice every mid-year to measure progress against it. In June this year, we announced that 9% of the funding for this year has gone to local partners. We will see towards the end of the year, and that again will be announced on the 1st of December to see how much we have progressed. And hopefully next year, when we hit December, we would have met the 25% target for protection. And finally, on visibility, that's a very important point to show that kind of progress. And for that, I'm also glad to announce that for the closure of this forum and for the launch of our Centrality of Protection report on the 1st of December, all the speakers will only be local speakers. So there will be no international closing our forum. And that's a very small symbolic gesture of where we see things going and where we would like to head. So thanks a lot, Anthony, and thanks everyone for this excellent pushing forward, sobering session. You have our commitment to keep going.
William, thank you. And everyone online, thank you as well for bearing with us. I know we are giving you a lot of really exciting things to reflect on together, and we're not giving you a lot of chance to reflect on that openly together. But we want to get these on the table because these are commitments that we're going to be able to hold ourselves accountable to in the months and years to come. I'm going to pass us directly across to Jonathan from the SDC. Many of us are very much aware that SDC has held a lot of leadership and champion roles in the localization efforts. And so, Jonathan, over to you to share with us your thoughts as one of our technical partners and donor partners.
Many thanks, Anthony, and thanks for having me today. First of all, I would like to congratulate Marina for this amazing guidance, and also congratulate everyone else involved in making this guidance. I think a lot of stakeholders from the IASC results groups, also from the Grand Bargain Localization Workstream, were involved. It was broadly consulted. As Marina said, it's not going to solve all your problems, but it's really a very solid resource, and it is adaptable to context. So congratulations again for everyone who was involved there. As you might know, Switzerland is co-convening the localization workstream together with IFRC. And I'm here today also to speak a bit about the donor view on capacity strengthening, or capacity sharing, as we like to say, and also on resourcing for coordination. And Switzerland does that through financial contributions, but also through secondments, for example, at the GPC, or also at the country level. And even I myself had the honor to support coordinators in protection and shelter in Myanmar a couple of years ago. And we also support NGO forums for both international and national NGOs. And through other projects, directly or indirectly, we support the important task of coordination, as many other donors do as well. This brings us to resourcing funds for coordination for local actors. And I think there's a couple of important points there. I think, coordination takes a lot of time. There's a lot of meetings. You need staff to attend. And I think that is one important point where we need to support local actors, or where we could support local actors. And I'm saying could because we need to be careful also that we don't start to finance a structure that we impose on local actors. So I think it should go hand in hand with a dialogue with local actors on what are their needs, what are their expectations from coordination. And once they see an added value in the coordination, I think it will also be easier for them to make the case to donors. And this issue of resourcing is very, very closely linked for local and national actors with the capacity strengthening and the capacity sharing, I think. And let me just highlight one thing from the localization workstream that we have done in the past. We have had a meeting where we tried to highlight the nexus relevance for capacity strengthening. As we all know, humanitarian funds are often short-term. Sometimes donors are not allowed to use humanitarian funds for long-term capacity strengthening of an organization. So we try to build a bit that bridge, and this discussion is still at the beginning. The work stream is likely to keep this on the agenda in the coming years, to advance it on a technical level. And also, of course, there is homework for the donors to do, to engage the development side, but also, if organizations have both a humanitarian and a development mandate, to really make that case to raise funds for strengthening local actors as an organization, and not just only project-related capacity sharing. So I think that's an important point there. And then one thing that I also would like to highlight is the point on meaningful participation of local actors. Of course, I'm saying things that are already here in this guidance. A lot of points we discussed today are touched on in this guidance and are addressed in a practical way. But in different contexts, you might have the clusters and the sectors, but you might also have more informal coordination structures. Often they're called humanitarian breakfasts or lunches or dinners. And I think here we need to be also careful that the participation of local actors is meaningful. It is in a language that they understand, and it is at the beginning of the agenda and not at the end as a kind of must-have. And I think there's a responsibility for all stakeholders in the humanitarian system actually to ensure that this participation is meaningful. To conclude, let me just briefly mention the plans of SDC on localization. After 5 years, we decided to hand over the co-convener role of the localization workstream, and we're in the process of identifying a donor to hand over to allow for fresh ideas also in the localization workstream. And at the same time, we want to focus our attention on the question of intermediaries. And I will allow myself to drop in the chat box link to a study that was conducted within workstream 2 on the role of intermediaries, so organizations between a donor and a local actor. And we have heard the reality check from the field. There is still a lot to do there. So that is what we would like to focus on in the coming years. Thanks so much again for having me, and back to you, Anthony.
Jonathan, thank you. And everyone, thank you very much for staying with us. As symbolic of the localization journey, there is so much to do, so much happening, and so much to share, not enough time. But I'm going to pass you over to our final speaker, Jennifer from the GBV AOR. Jennifer's going to bring us home for the end of this webinar with some thoughts and commitment from the GBV area of responsibility side. Jennifer, thank you for waiting, and over to you.
Thank you, Anthony. And it's been a really very interesting session. And I just want to, I know we're pressed for time, so I will try to be quick with my intervention. But I do want to say, at the beginning, I think the issue around funding was raised quite a bit. And I just want to say with the GBV AOR, we are looking at this issue. We've been working with OCHA to look at the issues around pooled funding, to look at SURF, and to see, to start doing a better job of tracking so that we have a baseline, so we know what is actually being spent, especially on women rights and women-led organizations. And this is something that a number of the UN agencies have committed to reporting on, so that we have more transparency on this issue. The AOR is starting a governance review, and we are including a couple of national women-led organizations into our governance structure from the beginning of this process, so that they can also be together challenging us and looking at how do we want to have our new governance structure. I think one of the really exciting things that's going on is that we have the US has decided that they are willing to fund us to look at some of these issues that have been raised today, to see if we can gain some learning that can inform how we do work in the future in the humanitarian system. So we will have a partner who is working with us around the issue of co-coordination, and we'll be working with in a couple of countries to have co-coordinators from women-led organizations and look at enabling a network across the different co-coordinators, and to have a learning specialist who can help us sort of gather the learning that we can share, of course, always contextualizing, but that we can share between the different AORs and the protection cluster, and hopefully motivate more donors to provide additional funding so that we can build on what we learned. So I think it's going to be an opportunity to put into place many of the issues that were raised today. And thank you all for the good information that you provided. I think we've all been learning a lot, so that we can really put into practice and really work in partnership rather than seeing women-led organizations and community-based organizations as implementing partners, but really in true partnership. And as Anthony, I know you talk a lot about the principles of partnership, and we really want to apply those in our coordination work. And we're really happy about this new guidance that's come out. And I think it's been clear today that we need to support sharing at the field level of information, which is one of the principles of partnership, and taking decisions together and having equality. And really, I heard Sebastian talking a lot about trust, and I heard a lot on the institution building and the need to strengthen institutions and not just working at the technical level, because we know that the technical skill set is there and we need to support other forms of institution building. So I realize that our time is very short. I think I will leave it there, but definitely the GBV AOR will continue to look at the issues from the grand bargain around the funding, which I think William mentioned around the 25%, and we say that is the minimum. It needs to actually be more than 25%. But really, we hope that all of you who spoke today will hold us as internationals accountable. And I heard that William mentioned a good way to doing that in a year we listen to the commitments we made and use them as a baseline to track how we're doing. And Anthony, I will hand back to you for the final statement, which I know you're very good at articulating. So back to you.
It's very kind and no pressure. Everybody, thank you so much. So this is the end of the webinar. For those of you who are coordinators, I really hope that you walk away from this with some ideas around how you can leverage the coordination system to make some changes. We know that the coordination system helps to design what a response looks like. So we have huge amounts of influence. If we want to make a change in the way that local partners are able to participate in, deliver, monitor, and be responsible for humanitarian responses, that is an area where we have influence. I hope you also know that you're surrounded by people that want to make this happen. I think everyone that stayed on this webinar, and it's a good sign when you look at the end of the webinar and see how many people left, particularly when you run late, like we did today, and we didn't lose people. I think that tells us that we are surrounded by people that want to make this work. So let's continue to draw on each other, use that guidance, use the coordination system, use the coordinators who've made commitments here today. And let's continue to push the boundaries on this. We know that many of us want the localization efforts to go faster. We have a lot of discussions around accelerating localization, trying to find ways to accelerate, because we want it to move faster than it is. But it is encouraging for those of you who were in things like the Global Protection Cluster Forum and Global Cluster annual meetings. So even just 5 years ago, we're having very different conversations than we were 5 years ago. And I think that's really encouraging. Thank you very much for staying with us. Thank you for all the comments in the chat. We're making notes of those so we can continue to use your ideas, suggestions, questions to challenge us and improve what we do. And please do continue to sign in to the rest of the Global Protection Forum sessions tomorrow. Thanks to all the speakers. Huge thanks to those of you who dialed in from other time zones. And of course, big thanks to Abu Yusuf and Sebastian for bringing us the country level perspective. With that, I'm going to sign out and wish you all a wonderful morning, afternoon, or evening. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.